Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, April the 9th in the Memorial Arena in Victoria. I'd like to start by thanking our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it all happen. I think it's been, unfortunately, another bad week for the planet, for democracy, for things that are right. I'm just going to start off rereading something I read last week. This was from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of, I think it's part of the United Nations, who put out a report about a week ago. This is what they say. In a new United Nations report released on Monday morning, scientists come to a stark conclusion. Unless the world changes course immediately and dramatically, the fundamental systems that support human civilization are at risk. It's amazing. Unless the world changes course immediately and dramatically, the fundamental systems that support human civilization are at risk. So that was reported by the United Nations last week, and I would really like to know how our media gives at least 100 times more coverage to the fact that the Vancouver Canucks just fired their general manager than they do to the fact that we have to change everything very quickly or we're doomed. It's amazing the stuff that goes on in this country, and you don't even know what to say.
Well, you know, it's not only the Canucks story. Hey, you know, that's a pretty big story, Jack.
But it is big. That's true.
But it's just that you even look in broader terms of larger issues and how the media is covering international issues, and there's some big, massive stories out there that are being told that I think are false.
Yeah, they also do that. They tell false stories.
I think the whole the whole story around the Ukraine is a very flimsy story. Very flimsy on the evidence that they presented to us. It's kind of a very convenient thing, because how do you fact check what's happening in the Ukraine and Crimea? So we have those issues too, these big massive stories that I think are mostly being shaped to deflect away and divert our attention away from these very pressing climate issues.
And a million others. I think the point is that we may not survive unless we can. I mean, the world is a big place. We're just a part of it. But here in Canada, we've got to do our bit. And we've become one of the worst over the last 20 or 30 years. We've just slipped in, you know, so many of the way progressive nations are ranked, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many. And one thing we've got to do is just build a media that is independent of corporate control, so that we Canadians know about the important scientific issues of the day and can discuss them intelligently.
And we're also consuming media, and I'm as guilty as anyone else. I spent years and years not having a television set, but I have one now, and all the channels you can possibly ask for. We've started to wind that back, but recently, last 3 or 4 weeks, because the remotes are so complicated, I can't figure out how to get from Netflix back. So all I do is watch Netflix, and guess what, Jack? I don't feel out of touch. I don't have the news anymore. I'm not getting it every day, and I'm waiting for somebody to come and tell me something really important that I've missed. You know, it's amazing how much media we consume. Just it's always there, but we're not really paying attention to it.
So I was talking to somebody about a month ago, and he said that it costs us, citizens, $70 a night for a shelter bed. And a shelter bed, I think, is just kind of a mattress on a floor somewhere in a church basement or a community hall or something like that. So he said that costs us $70 a night.
That's what taxpayer funding goes into these shelters.
Yeah, taxpayer funding, which I prefer to call citizen funding.
Yeah.
But yeah, it comes from our money, that's for sure. So I decided to look into it. I made a few phone calls, and I spoke to some people who gave me, I think, some. I mean, it's the information that is correct, I think. I'll just read this. When Alan Lowe was mayor of Victoria, I think he was the mayor at that time, there was a mayor's task force on homelessness, and they brought, I think, anyways, this is from that report. And this is back in 2007. It says, the average annual cost of a shelter bed is $25,500, which is about $70 a day.
When was that written, Jack?
This is 2007.
Well, think about that,
Yeah.
how much that has gone up probably.
But let's use that number. So the average annual cost of a shelter bed is $25,500. But in order to have a unit of supportive housing, let's say a small condo style room in a building, so to have a unit of supportive housing, meaning that not only does the person have a place to live, but they're getting the supports they need, and to operate it as well. So you build it, operate it, and give people supports. That would cost $17,000. So a shelter bed costs $25,000. We're paying $25,000 for a shelter bed. But to solve the problem would cost us $17,000. And they won't do it. Think of what that means. They won't do it. In fact, not only will they not do it, but they, and when I say they, I mean the corporations and the politicians and the media who have deliberately created this homeless nightmare in Canada. They deliberately created it, and now they force us to pay more to keep it going than we could pay to solve it. It's just absolutely bizarre. Maybe my numbers are wrong, but I think these are the correct figures.
You're not going to be too far off. I mean, I remember when somebody was telling me about, start referring to these agencies that are supposed to prevent cancer. They're calling them the cancer industry. I was wondering, what are they talking about, the cancer industry? Well, really, this is the poverty industry. It's just a lot of vested interests are there to keep things as they are. There's a lot of policing to be done. There's a lot of ambulance services.
Yeah, but you know what? I think really it's a decision made at the very top, and if we could overcome that power, then the police and the ambulances would happily do other things, which we certainly need done.
One would think, wouldn't they? But
I think this comes from the top.
there's no grassroots pressure either coming up to really from these people who are supplying these services, trying to explain to the government, hang on here, we could save you a lot of money, everybody would be a lot healthier and happier.
Well, there is that pressure. There's lots of people who are saying, we can do a much better job for a lot less money. Now, this doesn't get reported very much in the media, so we don't know it, but everybody in the field knows that these problems can be solved. And yet, imagine what it means when our leadership won't do it. I don't know what it does mean, but it seems to mean that this is not even the country that we fear that it is. It's even worse than that.
Well, they're pretty busy, building pipelines and fracking for gas and
I think they do this kind of stuff to destabilize our society, which homelessness has. When you think back about all the angst in our society that's been caused by that issue, and the broader issue of poverty, all of it unnecessary, but all of it quite deliberately caused by whoever it is that runs this country. And if you want to know who it is that runs this country, you should probably Google CCCE, which is the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. And basically it's the chief executive officers of the 150 biggest corporations, and I guess they represent the ownership. And there's people who think, although again, you'll never read it in the media, this is the real government of Canada. Mm-hmm. The NDP leadership.
Well, it sort of segs into the NDP. Always, these chief executive officers, how are they getting their message out is through public relations firms. Millions and millions of dollars spent on PR firms every year. And I'm pretty well convinced that there's no political party and there's no government that makes a move without the directions of a public relations firm, and that's really, really sad. There's very little policy, very little anything coming up from the grassroots.
So do the public relations firm bring the agenda of corporate Canada down to the political parties?
They're the go-between.
Okay.
They do the dirty works to a certain amount, but they do try to remain quite anonymous too. But in the end, it's all so slick, isn't it? And they hatch all these fantastic policies and all these budgets and things. And these people don't have the expertise. I'm not buying it. It's just, we know that the PR firms are pretty well running the show. Now, you would hope that maybe a social democratic party, we're supposed to have one in British Columbia, might reject that sort of model. Going away back, though, they never have. I remember Mike Harcourt getting nailed for massive amount of spending on PR firms from New York back when he was running the show. Glenn Clark. It's always been business as usual with these guys. So there's not much hope there of that changing. But the thing that we want to talk a little bit about is the fact that the NDP has a non-leadership race going on, that nobody's stepping up to run the party other than, well, we had Mike Farnsworth and John Horgan, who in many people's view are part of the problem that got them where they're at right now. So no new blood showing up for the NDP. One really has to wonder what the heck happened, that there was just absolutely, they're pretty well bankrupt for ideas. And there's no new people coming along.
It costs $15,000 to enter the race. And imagine what that means. Who's got $15,000? So any people who might have a new way of looking at things are probably not the ones with $15,000. It's, yeah, the NDP, I'm very disappointed. And it's interesting that the media keeps telling us that the NDP lost the last election because of Adrian Dix's stand on Kinder Morgan. It's like they're rewriting history. That is not the reason the NDP lost the election. I don't know what the reasons are. But for the media has created that myth. And they've done it quite successfully. I think a lot of people believe it now because it's all you hear. But I think if anybody actually looks at evidence, that's not.
Well, there is evidence that they did lose because of the Kinder Morgan announcement, but nobody ever looks at why they made the announcement and how it came out. And I think it's key to them losing the election, Jack, but it was just a series of bad decisions that were being made during the whole campaign. But the Kinder Morgan decision was the nail in their coffin. Just in case they had a chance, no, it wasn't going to happen. Okay. That was the nail in their coffin. And if you look at the demographics, you look at the election results and all those key swing ridings in the interior, all leaning towards NDP. After the announcement, they all went back to the Liberals. Had they won those swing ridings, they would have had a majority government. So,
okay, but I'll counter that with the fact that when the NDP was riding high, the Conservatives were polling at 20%. On election day, they got less than 5%. There was a 15% vote swing, of which I'll bet none went to the NDP.
Well, so, it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure, but it's an interesting situation where you had a case where the NDP were polling ahead in these ridings at one point or other, even with the Conservatives in the mix.
Okay.
So, but the public doesn't understand why that decision was made and how terrifically boneheaded that decision was, and that the people that instructed Dix to make that decision torpedoed the party, and that's why I believe the election was fixed, because his own consultants told him to do that when it was just a wildly outrageous thing to do at that point in the campaign. Because it didn't matter in the rest of the province, Jack, that much. It only mattered in those key swing ridings. And they knew if Dix made that announcement a couple of weeks before the election, it was game over for the NDP. And
well, I'd like to see the numbers sometime. We should get the numbers if we can. And
I have them, Jack.
Okay, yeah, bring them on. Bring them on. So this week, so this is April the 9th today, so I think it was just this past Sunday, there was an editorial in the Times Colonist that talks about the city of Victoria growing, and it said the new height limit in downtown is going to be 24 stories. So it was 14 stories up till now, although it says some exceptions were made, but now they've raised it to 24. And when I read that, I thought, well, thanks for telling me, Times Colonist, but how come I don't even know? How come it's already been done?
Yeah.
And does anybody know that the new height restrictions for downtown Victoria, 24 stories? To me, that just means like Vancouver. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people want 24 stories. You know, that's fine. But the fact that it happens, and you know, I've asked a few people about it, and everybody's as shocked as I was. Just the fact that these things go on in our city, major decisions are made, and the public isn't even told.
True. And I mean, what else is going on that we're not even hearing about? I mean, if you notice a buildings are 10 stories higher, people are going to start wondering. So you can't get around that. But so many other decisions are made too that we never hear about. So many administration decisions are made. And you know, all the decisions were made around the Johnson Street Bridge, and how the administration were very busily covering up all the inconvenient facts about that. So yeah, it's there's no checks and balances enough that to keep them honest anymore. The media is certainly not there acting as our advocate anymore. So
Yeah.
we're in the dark.
Last week on this show, somebody mentioned the fact that Christy Clark's husband used to be, what's the word? A lobbyist.
A lobbyist
Yeah.
for
Enbridge and the Northern Gateway Pipeline. So Christy Clark's husband used to be a lobbyist for Enbridge, and the media won't report it. I mean, it got reported in the Vancouver Observer. It got reported in the Georgia Strait and a few others who picked up the story, but the media won't report it. I mean, maybe it's not important that Christy Clark's husband was a lobbyist for Enbridge.
Oh, I think it's critical.
Oh, ex-husband, yes, you're absolutely right. They got divorced, but they were married at the time. Yeah, absolutely right. But it's just remarkable that through all that's happened over the past number of years, it doesn't even get a mention.
Well, you know, another lobbyist who she was associated with, who became her chief of staff, was also a lobbyist for Enbridge.
Right, Ken Bossencool.
And also, strangely, very abruptly resigned or quit under
And
suspicion that
another one of her deputy ministers, who I guess worked for
Yeah.
her, was also an Enbridge lobbyist. So, I mean, there's this connection, and that's, maybe it doesn't mean anything, but it's just remarkable that it doesn't get told to us. And
well, I mean, I think it means a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah.
You're being way too kind. I think the connections are way too close, and the facts all pile up really heavily against them when you look at it, how close they are associated with
the entire
with the industry.
LNG thing that Christy Clark is, I mean, it's number one. It's got to be completely and totally insane. I mean, to poison the province forever, for thousands of years, so a bunch of gas and oil companies can make more money. Is this the future we want? And yet, you know, the politicians can't get enough of it from all the major parties. The media never talks about it, and except to promote it and say, oh yeah, 1 million jobs, 10 million jobs, whatever you want. It's crazy.
And it
It's
flies.
absolutely
You think of the
crazy.
climate change announcement that was made, how we have to change our ways, and you look at that coal being extracted and piling up at Tsawwassen, and look at all this gas that they're drilling for, and there's no abatement to the oil development. Canada's poor, right in the midst of this boom in extraction of resources. Alberta's running a deficit. I mean, so many things are wrong with it, Jack. And but can I change the subject a little bit, because you know, the Quebec election just happened. It's related. It just reminded me. Remember, we were talking. Well, if Pauline Marois, who banned fracking on the day she was elected, how long will it take before fracking's back on the agenda in Quebec? And I'm guessing, you know, 2 or 3 weeks. there'll be a quiet announcement they're going to be fracking in Quebec again. The other thing, of course, is
I would think so. So let's see if we're right.
well, you know,
I think so.
the big issues are never talked about in campaigns. And I think that the Quebec election had a lot of irregularities too, by the way. We'll have to talk about that sometime, but I really think that they axed Pauline Marois because she wasn't doing the things they like, you know.
It's very possible. I mean, they certainly have the power.
Yeah, you know, so I think some big things are going to happen in Quebec again. And certainly the corruption issues were being examined, and a lot of people, a lot of people were being caught in with their.
Yeah, I mean,
and
a lot of
think
people
that's
have,
going to slow down now. Be back to business as usual, probably.
I think what it comes down to is all of us have to consume less. There's no way around that. We
Yeah.
just have to consume less, and we can. And I think we'll all be better off for it.
Yeah.
So it's not like that would be a horrible thing. That would be a wonderful thing. And we'd save the planet. And we have
Yeah.
1 minute left.
Well, no, consuming less is so darned important. And you look around, like I was cleaning my garage out this last weekend, and looking at all the stuff I got stored in there. What the heck am I doing with all this stuff? And nothing, basically. And it's just a new thing came along, and I put it in the house and took the thing I wasn't using to the garage. But the thing is that we're just not looking at our own households in a way, I think, or I haven't been, you know, as a self-sustainable entity. You know, it's just basically things come in, and then out the other end it's basically recycled or garbage. It's a massive amount of material, really.
That's what we are. That's our role in
Yeah.
the New World Order, is to consume and waste.
Yeah.
Consume and waste. And yeah. So next week, maybe we'll have a look at the numbers and try to figure out if we
Oh, I'll
can.
bring them,
Okay,
and
bring the
we'll have a
numbers.
little talk about it.
And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Derek Skinner. We're going to be talking about a lot of the usual issues, but from a more financial point of view, shall we say?
Yeah.
So Derek, you want to start off with the global situation.
Yeah. Well, the situation in Canada, I think, right now shows a really bad trend in government, where we are losing control of it. We people are losing control of our government, and there are three aspects to this. Globally, there's all kinds of influences that are controlling what Canada can and cannot do. Then nationally, within the country, where there's a whole range of things that we can do. And finally, because I think things are getting so out of hand, I think we, the people, have got to take things into our own hands and organize to straighten the government out. Now, a great big chore. I mean, that's an enormous project. But if you go back to the global scene, for the last about 100 years, people have been thinking about getting the world sort of into a one world benevolent association to get rid of wars. After the First World War, you had, what was it, the League of Nations? That didn't work very well. So then we had another big war. Then you had the United Nations. And along with the United Nations, the financial bigwigs started to impose their agenda on just how the world was being run, how the world was being developed. You had the World Bank, IMF, the World Trade Organization, things like that, which started to structure the world, and that was the beginning of a series of webs, web-like strands that had gradually been drawn around the world, financially, economically, with trade associations. Everybody starts to be tied into the fine print of a lot of legal documents. the, this web has resulted in ultimately the financial groups, Rockefeller, Carlyle Corporation, these people openly proposing a new world order that it would be corporate controlled. Milton Friedman back in the 70s said corporations can run business, can run the government much better than government. Let the corporations handle issues, you know. And that has been implemented in so many ways. One of the most egregious things that was wrong was corporations were given the attributes of people. That was done by legal trickery. I mean, that was somebody rewrote a judicial decision, but it stood. And
so that means that in the Canadian Constitution, all of the privileges and rights of being a person go actually as well to a corporation.
Exactly.
And while we don't have the money to go to court and protect our rights, corporations certainly do.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me think of well, the control of government has gradually been moved away from government into corporate boardrooms, banking institutions, financial institutions, all kinds of weird associations, trust funds, hedge funds, that create all kinds of strange things that they can do. It's sort of marginally inside the law, and legal apparatus has been cut, and I'm talking mostly about the American side for the moment. But in effect, what we end up with is a democratic deficit. We no longer have a democratic form of government, which is, we're told that that's what we've got. You know, we've got democracy. You can vote, you can choose who you want, but that's it. There's nothing more. You choose from platforms which are handed to you, take it or leave it. This is the platform, vote for this or vote for that one. And
even the platform is a lie.
Big time. Yes.
And because democracy means, from the Greek, demos the people and kratia to rule, it does mean the people rule. And we are in a position in Canada where the people aren't even relevant anymore. We're just completely out of the loop.
Exactly. Oh, you put that so well. Well, when you come to dealing with the way Harper, or I shouldn't say Harper, the Conservative Party is running the country from the Prime Minister's office. I think Harper is directing traffic, as you might say. I think it's mostly his agenda, but he has been given his agenda by the corporations, the financial people, because they say, if you want money, you know what we want. You want to get funded, you want to get re-elected, you'll need a lot of money for this. Okay, you do what we want. Corporations lobbying is awful.
But even more than that, the corporations own the media, which means they can cripple or destroy any politician. And not only that, but in Harper's case, the corporations and their media could probably have him out of power, I'd say within 3 weeks to a month. If they started today, he'd be gone in 3 weeks, because there's this whole story of him and the links to, the war crimes in Afghanistan.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Where Canadian troops handed Afghan civilians over to the police to be tortured. Everybody knew that, and that's a war crime. It's a war crime under Canadian law, and it's a war crime under United Nations law. The government knew about it, and so it goes up the ladder. Who in Harper's government knew, and was Harper told? And if yes, then he is on very shaky ground. Now, if the corporations say, Stephen, you know, you're a popular guy, you're a family man, everything's coming up roses, you're the prime minister, you're rich, but if 3 weeks from now you could be running from the police, how much power does that give them over Stephen Harper and all of our politicians?
Yeah, you're quite right. You're quite right. I think if we've set the global scene, we could talk now about what's happening inside Canada now, and the way that Harper is controlling the agenda. It's absolutely outrageous. He has total disregard for parliamentary procedures and debate. He is running roughshod over all kinds of parliamentary protocols that we rely on in order to get issues properly exposed and debated and maybe changed. But under him, omnibus bills, there is no way that they can be properly debated. They are just rammed through with, it's not just a budget bill, normally it's a budget bill, but tacked onto it are alterations to all kinds of legislation. And it all goes through as one massive change.
And doesn't the government of Canada have some obligation to do what the people of Canada want? But we're at the point now, not only with the Harper government, but many of our provincial governments and city governments, they just do what they want, and the public has no ability to even have a voice anymore. It is the whole government structure, our political system has been so corrupted by the power of the money of this wealthy elite, and they're destroying our country and poisoning us.
Yeah, that is what I think the popular term is, a democratic deficit. I mean, that is what we're trying to deal with now. We do not.
You want to talk about no need for cuts? This is a rich country, and we can.
Oh yeah. This is perhaps a little outside the normal line of thinking, but Canada as a whole is incredibly, enormously, unthinkably rich with our oil reserves, or tar sands, timber, minerals, diamonds, gold mines, agriculture, farming, all the things that we produce. It has been totaled by somebody, a society somewhere, that the value of that is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. That is a credit base that this country has. Now, we could, and at one time we did, borrow against that credit base. The government gave bonds to the Bank of Canada, which is nominally our bank, and the Bank of Canada cashed the bonds, gave the government money, and it stayed there. The government of the Bank of Canada held the debt. The debt, I'll get into this later, but debt as in itself is absolutely meaningless. It's the interest you pay on the debt that is the killer. That is what is interesting to everybody. How much interest can you get? In the 1970s, I think it was under Trudeau's watch, but Governor Bowie of the Bank of Canada, I don't know why he did it, but I don't know if he was threatened or if he just agreed with the philosophy that was being espoused by other people for keep government out of the financing. But anyway, he changed the arrangement for dealing with bonds, and he sold them on again to private banks. Now, whereas when they were held by the Bank of Canada, if there was any interest to be paid, the Bank of Canada held the interest. It's a crown corporation, so at the end of the year, that interest went back to the government. So virtually they were interest-free. Those bonds were interest-free. Then it was changed, and the bonds were what they call rediscounted to the private banks, and we paid commercial rates of interest.
You know, and it's worth mentioning that interest just on the national debt, forget about the provincial debts, has been hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 30 years, probably close to $1 trillion.
Oh, it's more than that.
More than $1 trillion that we have paid in interest to, you know, the people who own the debt that we never had to pay. We've bankrupted ourselves, and we never had to do it because we have our own bank, the Bank of Canada, that we don't have to pay interest to.
Exactly.
So corrupt.
Over 50 years, up till about 2010, I don't have any figures beyond then, but the interest we had paid was $1.1 trillion. It's now, I think, I'm told it's around $1.4 trillion worth of interest paid. The interest rate on that debt has been, well, I know, I better not say that. I was going to say it's been up in the double-digit range. Bonds, I mean, the debt is based on bonds, and the bonds are sold to the government, to the Bank of Canada, and then on to the other banks at a certain premium and interest rate. And I believe that interest rate has been up in the 7, 8, and 10%. Now, our debt is in the range of, well, right now it's over $600 billion. But the period I'm talking about, back in the 1980s, the debt would probably have been around 300 billion. I'm guessing at the moment. We were paying every year 10% on $300 billion. Where did that money come from? It came out of our taxes. That's the government collected taxes, and it paid these enormous sums of money, $30 billion a year in interest payments. Right now, because they have held the rate on bonds down in the 2 to 3% range, the accumulated interest is $17 to $18 billion a year.
So that's why students are paying huge amounts of interest. Student debt is so high, that's why there's so much poverty, etc. Derek, we're down to 2 minutes. Do you want to talk a little bit about what to do?
That's all we got left?
That's all we got left.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Okay.
I failed in my job to move us on.
Okay. It's up to us as people. We've got to sort it out. Our two corporate-controlled political parties, they will not combine to take down the Harper government. So it's up to us. We've got to do it.
Proportional representation?
We've got to get to proportional representation. We've got to get to reusing the Bank of Canada. There are two organizations that are doing it. The biggest one right now is Lead Now, which has hundreds of thousands of supporters. And it's on the web, and you can just Google Lead Now, and you'll get to it. There's another organization, I call it the Umbrella Group. It's local to the island and in Ontario. It's very small, but we're doing the same thing. It's called the Alinsky method. You get everybody to say what it is they want to do, and from all the different inputs, you compile what is the most important thing, 3 or 4 things that they want to do, they want to get done. And this is how Lead Now has collected their hundreds of thousands of people.
Derek, I'm afraid we're out of time. Lead Now, and the Umbrella
The Umbrella Group.
Group.
Yeah.
So Google them and just get involved. Bank of Canada and democracy. Derek, thanks very much.
You're welcome. Oh dear, I wish I'd had the chance to explain more about
Thanks for
Lead
watching
Now.
Citizens Forum. Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum, the third segment. I'd like to begin by thanking again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff. This is being filmed on Wednesday, April the 9th. Our guest is Mazin Al-Nahawi. And Mazin, where do you want to start?
First of all, before start about the issue of Palestine, I would like to mention two notes here regarding your guest last week, Kai Nagata. It was a very important segment, and people need really to check more about his work. He has the notanks.ca website. There is another issue also about last week we have in Victoria a Palestinian professor from Bethlehem came here to talk about the Palestinian issue and the popular resistance. He has a website about popular resistance. For people to follow up about what he talked about, they can go to Guerrilla Radio because Chris Cook interviewed him and they had the audio segment on Guerrilla Radio.
Okay, so Guerrilla Radio, I think, is G-O-R-I. Anyways, it's G-O-R to start
or
with.
if you Google Chris Cook, Guerrilla Radio will...
or Pacific Free Press.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Kai Nagata was from the Dogwood Initiative, so if you want to find him, you can Google Dogwood Initiative too.
Yeah. Now, going to the story of the Palestinian question, as I like always to call it, we were talking about the role of the U.S. before, but we never had a chance to expand on that. Many people think that the U.S. is a kind of outside power who has nothing to do with the issue and try to go through the peace process between the Palestinian and Israeli. But in reality, the Israeli occupation state is organically connected to the U.S. state in a way that we need always to remember that the money, when we follow the money, we can understand better how things on the ground. The existence of the establishment of the Israeli occupation state in Palestine, its main goal to keep the whole region destabilized in a turmoil. So we have as like if you see how the colonialists did the same job in Africa by dividing it, creating a state, unnatural state. In the example of Palestine here, we have a small tiny land were allocated to colonial settlers came from Europe, regardless of what the native wishes about if they want to have a Jewish state in their homeland or not. So imagine a group or minority of a different continent make a plan to create a state, let's say in Vancouver Island, which is kind of similar size to Palestine, to show you how it's small. And let's imagine that they have a 3% population here, and because of these 3% population, they want to create a state here, let's say call it Muslim state or a Christian state or a Jewish state. For you as a native here, would you accept that a land has 97% native or not Jews to have a Jewish state in your land?
Yeah, it's quite amazing that it all happened.
This is very important fact when we look to Palestine issue. If we don't understand from the beginning that the whole Zionist idea was to create a Jewish state on a land has 97% population, not Jews, then later you can understand how this happened. How can you get rid of 97% to create a Jewish state there? This is exactly what happened. We had to rid of the native, and this is not a unique story in history. If you look to all the colonial settler process happened, like let's say in Algeria, South Africa, and Palestine, we have here two narratives: the colonial settler narrative and the native narrative, you would see that the native Palestinians, South Africa, Algeria, actually identical story. All of them are saying it's a struggle against outside power coming, taking over their land, squeezing them in a small territory. They cannot use their own water, like in case of Palestinian, for example, the rain come to their land, the Israelis sell it to them. It's so. On the other hand, you have a three narrative of the French, colonial settler French, and the European colonial settler in South Africa, and the Zionist colonial settler in Palestine. All also they have identical story. All of them, somehow they used biblical stories. That land, for example, was promised to them. I mean, imagine somebody knock on your door, tell you, your home was promised to me by God. I mean, and you need to get out of it. So this is the kind of myths and mythology they are using to kick out of it. Actually, we have already myths like a land without people for a people without a land.
And I mean, to me, what you said at the very beginning is of prime importance, that there was an outside force that made this all happen because that outside force wanted something. And in this case, I think they wanted to completely destabilize the Middle East, because everybody knew back in the 1920s and 1930s that that's where the oil was, huge amounts of wealth. So, I mean, if you look at the history of World War II, money flowed from corporate America and corporate Europe to create Nazi Germany. Hitler was funded in part through a bank that was partly owned by the grandfather and father of the two presidents Bush.
By the way, the Jews in the U.S. started camping to boycott the Nazi Germany. It's very well known that there was a big movement of boycott against the Nazi. Who tried to break that movement? The Zionists. The Zionists themselves were against the boycott movement against the Nazi, and actually they sent a letter to the Nazi party, the Zionist organization in Germany, saying that we are against the boycott, and we are also like the Nazi state. We would like to have our own state with solely pure Jewish state. So add to that, we have the agreement between the Nazi and the Zionist, Havara agreement, which made to transfer money to the Nazi. In the same time, the Nazi will allow young Jews to go to Palestine.
Now, you also mentioned on a past show that a lot of Jewish people, for example, Albert Einstein, were totally opposed not only to the Nazis but also to the Zionists.
Exactly.
And that's still the case.
Yeah, actually he called them a criminal, and in a letter he sent to a Zionist, tried to bring Einstein, you know, it's the kind of a PR for the Zionist state from early in the 40s. So he sent a letter back to him. He said, when the catastrophe, and by the way, Palestinians call the Independence Day of the Zionist occupation state as the catastrophe day. And none other, Einstein used that word. He said, when the catastrophe fall upon Palestine, the first responsible for it will be the British, and the second is the people from our own rank. And he said that he is not willing to be associated with such criminal and misled people.
So I think a lot of what we've been told about that entire issue has been not exactly the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as is what we're told about virtually every other important issue. You want to stay with that, or do you want to move on to...
I want to mention something about you mentioned many Jews also were against the Zionist movement, and they did not want to go to a land where many Jews would consider themselves German or French, and the idea of Zionism, that anti-Semitism, we cannot compete with it, and we had to move out and go and have our own society. Many of them refused that. but these facts are covered in the media. They don't talk, they don't show you the thousands of protesters of Jewish Orthodox. They made usually huge protests in New York, in Washington D.C., carrying sign against the Israeli occupation state. But all these protests and all these statement from a huge sector, a big sector of Jewish people against Zionism, it's not on the media.
And right now we have a group like Independent Jewish Voices, IJV, which speaks out very strongly against so much of what Israel is doing, but that's never reported in the media. The media prefers the people of Canada and the people of the United States to think that the Jewish community is united behind Israel. That's not the case. That's not the case at all.
Exactly.
And the corporate media, for their own interests, which are power and money, they won't tell us.
Yeah, to understand Zionism, really, you need to read Zionism. You need to read the Zionist leadership of the Zionist movement and what they wrote about how they are going, the way they are going to accomplish their goal. They called it clearly a colonial settler state. They knew exactly they are going to face a native population. Like, for example, in the beginning when Herzl, he sent two rabbis to Palestine to see the weather, to see how, if it's possible to create the Jewish state in Palestine, and that late in 19th century. One of the rabbis sent him a telegraph back saying, "The bride is beautiful, but she has another man." Because there was having an idea that Palestine, it's an empty land and it's just waiting for European Jews to come there and establish their state there. But this land, it's from the early history. One of the cities of Palestine, Jericho, goes back to 12,000 BC, at least to 8 or 9,000 BC. So we have between 10 to 12,000 continuous living in that area. So the idea of it's empty land, it's not, or the other idea that they made the desert bloom. I'm glad that we have many documents and many studies from the colonialists themselves, like the British themselves. They made a whole archive about Palestine and the land, farming land, and the production of olive, the production of oil, fruit. So the idea that this land is empty and it's just ignored and nobody there, it's one of the first lies the Zionists use. The second lie, when you are talking about the Jews are returning to their homeland. Many Jews who stayed in that land later became Muslim or a Christian, and they never left that land. The Zionists themselves wrote books about it, saying that the native Palestine are the original Judean. That's what Ben Gurion said in 1919. But when these original Judean did not accept to have a Jewish state in their land, so after 1929, Ben Gurion and the other Zionists, they want to get rid of them. I mean, they want them in the beginning. They said they are the blood and the flesh of the old Judeans. But this blood and flesh don't want to have a Jewish state here now. Because
so what you're saying is the Jewish people who lived there thousands of years ago stayed there, and over the centuries converted into the dominant religion, which was Muslim or Christian or whatever. And
the Zionists later wrote about it.
Yeah.
But now they tell you, no, we are
Different.
returning back there. Especially if we take, there is the 80% of Jewish population around the world are Ashkenaz Jews. They are European converted. They has nothing to deal with Palestine. As if you are saying that the American Muslims, they are originally came from Saudi Arabia. Or
I see. But it was really just people who converted to become Muslims in the United States,
So
like Muhammad Ali, for example.
Yes, so Muhammad Ali did not come from Mecca. Muhammad Ali came from the US.
Although originally he may have, because who knows where his family originally
came from Ethiopia originally.
I guess we did.
60,000 years ago. So maybe we all need to come back to Ethiopia and kick the Ethiopian out and create our state.
Let's not even go there.
Actually, the second point we're going to talk about is the solidarity movement.
Okay.
and it's another important issue here.
Now, what is the solidarity movement?
Exactly. What is solidarity movement? If you wanna have you wanna stand up with a group of people who are oppressed, I think the first thing you need to do first is to understand exactly their situation. Without understanding the situation Palestinians are facing, or poverty in in Africa, or trouble anywhere, you cannot release. I mean, without diagnose the issue to find out what is the virus is, you cannot really solve later the issue. And many Canadian, and I appreciate everybody try to go and help outside of Canada, to like when you go to Salvador, or when you go to Palestine, or to Myanmar, but the issue is, first we have a citizen duty we have to do here. Be sure that our government, our representative are doing a fair and just work here before going out and try to fix the trouble outside the war. More importantly, if our government involved in this issue, so we have a citizen duty here to stop our government from being associated with apartheid regime, or supporting an ethnic cleansing, or corporate mining going after native community. We have a work more to do here than to go outside and support these people. So I do appreciate what many Canadians work for Palestine issue, but I appreciate it more if we focus on home and do our local homework before going out and try to stop the mess somewhere else, because they are all connected.
Yeah, I know that's how you feel. To me, it's more like if somebody wants to do something outside and can be of use, yeah, to me that's fine. I know we kind of disagree on that, but you know, maybe you're right. I don't know.
Let's take South Africa. The same statement American used to demonize Palestinians and their resistance against the occupation, it was the same terminology was used to be used against the South African. Mandela was a terrorist.
Right.
All these hypocrites who used to demonize the native in South Africa, now they want to go there and express their solidarity with the South African. But it's exactly the same story with Palestine. 20 years from now, you could people understand that it's the same story happening in South Africa. The boycott movement is very important, and it started the whole pressure on South Africa. It's starting now to do this kind of similar things, but boycott on its own, it's not enough. Again,
And even though it's starting, we have to stop.
we can't continue again
Mazen,
next
thank you
time.
very much. Thanks for watching. And I think when we criticize the United States, please remember we're not criticizing the people of the United States, or at least I'm not. And it's the government and the people behind the government. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks for watching Citizens Forum.